Hi, this is Dr. Chen, and this is a lecture on chapter 11. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about true false items. And of all the types of items that we've covered in this book so far, true false items may seem like they're the easiest to write, but you got to be careful, because short does not mean easy all of the time. Short can also mean it's difficult to write because you have very little space to be precise and say exactly what you mean. Um, so the main topics in this chapter is going to be divided as follows. First, we'll talk about what we use them for, and then we'll talk about some of the guidelines for creating true/false items, some of the advantages and disadvantages, as well as the correction for guessing formula. So first, let's talk about what we use true/false items for. So true/false items are most often used for achievement types of tests when there is a clear distinction between the two alternatives, true or false. One of the best criteria for judging the value of a true or false item is whether the correct answer, be it true or false, is unequivocally the right one, the only one, and the correct one. In other words, they cannot be both a true and false answer to a good true/false question. Just like this item over here, true or false. A minute is 60. A minute is 60 minutes. Obviously, that's going to be wrong. So it is quite clearly false. So regardless of whether we're talking about true, false, right or wrong, or yes or no types of items, these types of items generally fall under a dichotomous or binary type of format, and you may see that come up in the quizzes or in the exam. So make sure you know what is the main characteristic of true false items. So let's talk about some of the guidelines. There are 9 guidelines you kind of keep in mind on how to best write these items. The first one is for true false items. You want to always state true false items as declarative sentences. So here's an example of what you don't want to do. Is it true or false that a leap year occurs every 4 years? That's a question. What you want to do is that you want to transform that into a statement, a good declarative statement, just like this one. True or false? A leap year occurs every 4 years on the lunar calendar. I mean, the second one arguably is more direct and more clear compared to asking a question. If you're asking a question, you might as well go with a different type of format, not true or false. All right. Second, um, alternative answers can be true or false, right or wrong, yes or no, or whatever they are, as long as they have very clear choices and are binary in nature. And I think I mentioned that already. So, uh, here is what you don't want to do. You definitely don't want to ask. Maybe you're not. Circle 1. B.F. Skinner's studies focus on short-term memory. And this is the same question. It's a simple yes or no item. So yes or no, B.F. Skinner's studies focus on short-term memory. All right. Third, a good true-false item focuses on one and only one idea, concept, or a specific topic. Sometimes if you try to be too ambitious and focus on too many ideas, the test taker may get confused. So if the focus is too general, the test taker may start to overanalyze the possible answers and try to make their way or argue their way around how a declarative statement may very well be both true or false. So you want to be precise in focusing on one specific topic or concept and not on too many things all at one time. So this is an example of how not to write an item. True or false, a roux is prepared using fat and flour and is always made as the first step in the preparation of sauce. Well, not only might a roux be prepared using other ingredients, it may be the first step in another preparation other than that of a sauce. So here's a better version of that item. True or false, a roux can be prepared using fat or flour. This is obviously a lot more clear and a lot more precise compared to the first one, where we're trying to cover too many different aspects of the content that we're trying to assess. Fourth, you want to avoid statements of opinions if at all possible. Salkind was a little bit soft in the stance because he says that we should be careful instead of just avoiding statements of opinion in general. I'm just gonna say just stay away from statements of opinions because that's technically not a true or false item if you're trying to cover, if you're trying to assess how much a person knows. Because if you were to ask someone's opinion, then it gets confusing as to whose opinion the test taker should be thinking about, and it also violates one of the rules that of true false items that there should only be one answer of the two options provided. So just stay away from statements of opinion if at all possible. Fifth, you want to avoid double negatives. Double negatives may be fun to confuse your friends, but it should not be part of a true false question because they will confuse the test taker and just create unnecessary frustration. So, this is an example of a terrible item. Yes or no, neither technique 1 nor technique 2 should be used with caution. So you can almost kind of imagine a test taker kind of reading this word forward and trying to figure out, okay, neither technique 1 nor technique 2. Instead of creating that much frustration, let's just cut straight to the chase and just ask yes or no, technique 1 should be used with caution. A lot more direct, a lot more precise. We're probably gonna get better item performances for this one. All right, number 6. You want to be careful of qualifiers such as always, never, and sometimes, and so on. Um, for one, because they not only limit your ability to write precisely, but they're also quite unnecessary. Um, if a statement is true, then it's going to be true always and forever. Um, so, for example, the item over here has unnecessary qualifiers embedded in it. True or false, the Earth absolutely, without a doubt, and most assuredly revolves around the Sun. Here it is again in a much better form. True or false, the Earth revolves around the Sun. So, um, this is not a creative writing class. When you're talking about creating achievement types of items that measure how much a person truly knows, you want to take away all this superfluous language that just adds unnecessary weight and variance to what you're trying to measure. Seventh, you don't want to include clues to the answers in your items. Those qualifiers that we had just talked about can also serve as clues for some test takers because some any test wise student might know that statements that contain words such as always, all the time, never, they're usually false because, well, one, it's based on the assumption that the item is poorly written, and two, there's very little things in this world that is never true or always false all the time. Um, Another clue that you probably want to avoid is if 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 your true items are consistently of a different word length compared to your false items. Mostly sometimes because you're trying to be more precise compared to the other one. So you want to keep your word length the same if at all possible between your two options. 8, you want to leave the more complex material to different types of items if you want to tap into higher order thinking. Because the very nature of complex material, this doesn't lend itself really well to the unambiguous answers of correct or incorrect. So, for example, here's a topic that would have been better couched within a short answer or essay question. So, correct or incorrect? Given that the internal combustion engine is a significant source of carbon monoxide emissions and that there are more than 200 million cars in the United States used on a daily basis, the only answer to reducing these gases is through alternative energy sources and hydrogen power cars. That's a mouthful. If you really want your test taker to go into more depth or integrate information from various sources to tap into high order thinking, basically, you probably want to go with a short answer or essay question as opposed to trying to cram all of that into a true false question, just like what this example is doing over here. Last but not least, you want to have if at all possible, an approximately equal number of true or false items on the test. It's not too hard to do. Just kind of rearrange your true or false. This can help minimize the role that chance can play. An interesting finding that's mentioned in your textbook was a study done by Lee Cronbach, which that may ring a bell with you because back in one of the chapters when we talk about reliability, you talk about Cronbach's alpha. Well, Lee Cronbach was the researcher who came up with that measurement, And he did a study in 1950 where he found that when students don't really have a clue as to what the right choice is on a true or false item, they will most often go with true. So that might be a tip for you too when you're making this. You want to make you want to have about an equal number of true or false items, but also kind of keep in mind that if in doubt, most students tend to go with the true item. So if you want to avoid false positives, then you definitely want to keep that pattern in mind. All right. Let's talk about some of the reasons for using true false items and reasons not to use them. This table here summarizes why they're good and why they're not so good. Just as how the guidelines were important for you to know for the exam, remember too that this is important for you to know the advantages and disadvantages. So if an exam question lists some possible advantages or disadvantages of true false items, you want to be able to recognize them and weed out the distractors. Let's talk about the first advantage. Is that they're convenient to write and administer, so you can administer a bunch in a short amount of time because they're relatively short. Second, they're very easy to score. If well written, the answers are very clearly either correct or incorrect, and regardless of the physical construction of the item. So whether you're asking them to circle the option, write true or false, or indicate uppercase T, uppercase F, they're generally easy for the test taker to respond to, easy for the test scorer to score too. Disadvantages though. First, the truth may never be quite what it seems. So for example, if you take a look at this item over here, true or false, water is liquid. Water is liquid, and it could be argued fairly effectively that it is true, but it's not always liquid. It could be gas or vapor, or solid or ice. So moral of the story is you want to be careful when writing true false items. You want to provide concise, brief items that effectively distinguishes between those who know their stuff versus those who don't. And that can sometimes be tricky. So don't let the brevity lure you into a false sense of complacency here. Second, true false items place a premium on memorization. It's really tough to go beyond the most basic levels of knowledge with true false items. Um, so you probably want to recognize this limitation for true false items, and not think that you can easily tap into higher levels types of knowledge. Third, it's fairly easy to guess right. The probability of being right or wrong is about 50%, and by chance alone. If the test taker selects true or false on a somewhat random basis, the final score will be about 50%. So how can we correct for guessing? Well, fortunately, there is a formula that you could use to correct for guessing. And so to obtain a corrected score for guessing, we need to calculate the number of items an individual got correct, that is R, uppercase R, and the number of items the individual got incorrect on that same test, so that's uppercase W. You subtract the number of incorrect items from the number of correct items, and you get the corrected score. So make sure you know this formula really well for the exam. As well as the symbols that are used over here. So uppercase CS, uppercase R, uppercase W. So how do we use this formula? Let's just say we have a 50 item test. And we know just by chance alone, because it is true or false, you can expect a score of 25 by chance alone. So Bruce, let's just say he got 35 correct. 35, which is R, the number of correct items, minus the number of incorrect items, is going to be 50 minus 35, which is 15. So 35 minus 15, or R minus W, equals to the corrected score, which is 20. On the other hand, Bill, who got 25 correct, we take 25, number of items that are correct, number of items that were incorrect, 25 minus 25, which is 0. Which should make intuitive sense, because if a person got 25 items correct, it's reasonable for us to conclude that he or she may or may not know the content, because we can pretty much attribute this score to chance alone, given that people can get a 25% because it is a true or false 50-50 chance for each item. So again, we just want to be clear. Your chapter actually gives you a table that nicely kind of summarizes the corrected score for different types of different ranges of scores that you would expect. Go through that and make sure you know how to calculate the corrected score. Know the formula for that. And obviously, a lot of the other things that we talked about will be important. Remember that true or false items are most often used for measuring basic knowledge, It's not really useful for examining higher order types of thinking. Keep in mind that the probability of guessing is correct is much higher than for any of the other types of items that we covered so far. But all is not lost. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't use true/false items. As long as you realize this limitation and correct your scores for guessing, true/false items can actually do a pretty good job of assessing one's basic knowledge in a particular domain. And again, it's pretty efficient for the test taker and the test scorer as well. So this is pretty much the perfect type of item for measuring basic types of knowledge, especially if a premium is going to be placed on how much time it's going to take to process the scores and how much time your test takers have to complete the items too. So that's all we have for this chapter. We talked about what we use true/false items for, how to write them. There are 9 guidelines, the advantages and disadvantages, and the correction for guessing formula. Let me know if you have questions, and I hope you have fun with this.